The harsh fluorescent lights of Rosewood General Hospital's emergency room buzzed incessantly, casting an unflattering glow on Sarah Thompson's worn features. Her once vibrant chestnut hair hung limply around her face, and dark circles shadowed her hazel eyes. The 28-year-old nurse's aide moved with quiet efficiency, her threadbare sneakers squeaking softly against the linoleum floor as she emptied bedpans and changed sheets. "Thompson," barked Dr. Richard Blackwell, his voice dripping with disdain. "Clean up the mess in room 3. Now." Sarah nodded meekly, her shoulders hunching as she hurried to comply. As she entered the room, her heart sank at the sight of vomit splattered across the floor. With a weary sigh, she grabbed a mop and began to clean. Well, if it isn't little Sarah Thompson," drawled a familiar voice, dripping with malice. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes widening in recognition. There, lounging against the doorframe with a smirk twisting her perfectly painted lips, stood Veronica Blackwell, Dr. Blackwell's daughter and Sarah's former high school tormentor. "V. Veronica," Sarah stammered, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "What are you doing here?" Veronica's laugh was like shards of glass. "Oh, just dropping by to see Daddy, dearest. But imagine my surprise when I stumble upon our very own Cinderella, still scrubbing floors." Her eyes glittered with cruel amusement. "Tell me, Sarah, does your Prince Charming know you're elbow deep in other people's bodily fluids?" Sarah's grip tightened on the mop handle, her knuckles turning white. "I'm just doing my job, Veronica," she said softly, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Your job?" Veronica scoffed, her designer heels clicking against the tile as she sauntered into the room. "Honey, this isn't a job. It's a life sentence of mediocrity." She leaned in close, her perfume overwhelming Sarah's senses. "Face it, you'll always be nothing more than a nobody from the wrong side of the tracks." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She wouldn't give Veronica the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not again. "Is there a problem here?" Dr. Blackwell's stern voice cut through the tension like a knife. Veronica's demeanor instantly changed, her face morphing into a mask of innocence. "Of course not, Daddy," she cooed, linking her arm through his. "I was just catching up with an old acquaintance." Dr. Blackwell's cold gaze swept over Sarah, his lip curling in disgust. "Thompson, I don't pay you to socialize. Get back to work." "Yes, Dr. Blackwell," Sarah murmured, ducking her head as father and daughter swept out of the room. As the door swung shut behind them, Sarah allowed a single tear to escape, splashing onto the floor she just cleaned. She took a shuddering breath, steeling herself against the familiar ache of humiliation and loneliness that threatened to overwhelm her. Little did Sarah know, her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. Across town, in the opulent Blackwell mansion, Veronica reclined on a plush chaise lounge, regaling her mother, Elizabeth, with tales of her encounter at the hospital. "You should have seen her face, Mother," Veronica cackled, sipping champagne from a crystal flute. "Still as pathetic as ever. Can you believe she actually works for Daddy?" Elizabeth Blackwell, a statuesque blonde with ice blue eyes, pursed her lips in distaste. "Really, darling, must we discuss the help? It's so déclassé." "Oh, but it's just too delicious," Veronica insisted. Little Sarah Thompson, perpetual loser, now scrubbing floors for a living. It's like a fairy tale in reverse. As mother and daughter shared a laugh at Sarah's expense, neither noticed the shadow that passed across the face of Thomas, the elderly butler who had served the Blackwell family for decades. His gnarled hands trembled slightly as he refilled their glasses, his mind racing with a secret that could shatter their world of privilege and cruelty. Meanwhile, in a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, Sarah collapsed onto her threadbare couch, exhaustion seeping into her very bones. The tiny living room was cluttered but clean, filled with second-hand furniture and faded photographs. Her eyes fell on a picture of a smiling couple, her parents, both gone far too soon. "I miss you both so much," Sarah whispered, tracing their faces with a gentle finger. "I'm trying to make you proud, but..." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands, finally allowing the tears to flow freely. A soft knock at the door startled her from her misery. Wiping her eyes hastily, Sarah rose to answer it, wondering who could be calling at this late hour. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the door to reveal Jake Morrison, her handsome next-door neighbor. His warm brown eyes crinkled with concern as he took in her tear-stained face. "Sarah? Is everything okay?" he asked, his deep voice filled with genuine worry. "Oh, Jake," Sarah managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, really. Just a long day at work." Jake's brow furrowed, unconvinced. "You know, I was just about to order some takeout. Why don't you join me? My treat." Sarah hesitated, her instinct to withdraw warring with her desperate longing for companionship. I don't want to impose," she stammered. "Nonsense," Jake insisted, his smile warm and inviting. "What are neighbors for?" Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself nodding. As she followed Jake to his apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Little did she know, the winds of fate were already in motion, set to upend everything she thought she knew about herself and the cruel world that had shaped her. The following morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging within Sarah as she made her way to Rosewood General. Her brief respite with Jake had been a balm to her wounded spirit, but the harsh light of day brought with it the crushing weight of reality. As she entered the hospital, Sarah's steps faltered. There, in the bustling lobby, stood Veronica Blackwell, holding court among a group of fawning admirers. Sarah's stomach churned as she attempted to slip by unnoticed, but Veronica's sharp eyes locked onto her like a predator spotting prey. "Well, if it isn't our very own Florence Nightingale," Veronica called out, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, Sarah, do you ever get tired of being so insignificant?" The group around Veronica tittered, their laughter like daggers to Sarah's heart. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Humiliation burned hot on her cheeks as she ducked her head and hurried past, the sound of their mockery ringing in her ears. As Sarah retreated to the sanctuary of the supply closet, she leaned against the shelves, fighting back tears. "Why?" she whispered to the empty room. "Why can't they just leave me alone?" "Because cruelty is the weapon of the weak, my dear," came a gravelly voice from behind her. Sarah whirled around, her heart pounding. There, partially hidden in the shadows, stood Thomas, the Blackwell family's elderly butler. His rheumy eyes held a spark of kindness that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't realize anyone was here." Thomas stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. "No need to apologize, Miss Sarah. I've been waiting for the right moment to speak with you." Sarah's brow furrowed in confusion. "With me? But why?" The old man's face creased with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "Because, my dear, it's time you learned the truth about who you really are." Before Sarah could respond, the door burst open, revealing an irate Dr. Blackwell. "Thompson," he barked. "What the hell are you doing hiding in here? There's work to be done." As Sarah scrambled to explain, Thomas melted back into the shadows, his eyes never leaving her face. The moment had passed, but the seed of a life-altering revelation had been planted. Throughout the day, Sarah's mind raced with questions. What did Thomas mean? What truth could he possibly know about her? The mystery gnawed at her, providing a welcome distraction from the constant barrage of slights and insults she endured. As her shift neared its end, Sarah found herself cornered in the break room by Melissa, a fellow nurse's aide with a penchant for gossip. Did you hear? Melissa whispered, her eyes gleaming with excitement. There's a rumor going around that old man Blackwell isn't really Veronica's father. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. What? But how is that possible? Melissa leaned in closer, her voice dropping even lower. Apparently, Elizabeth had an affair years ago with some mystery man. The timing lines up perfectly with Veronica's birth. As Melissa continued to spill the salacious details, Sarah's mind whirled. Could it be true? And if so, what did it mean for the Blackwell family's carefully cultivated image of perfection? Little did Sarah know, this piece of gossip was just the tip of an iceberg of secrets that would soon come crashing down, forever altering the course of her life and the lives of those around her. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah trudged wearily towards her apartment building. The events of the day weighed heavily on her mind, Thomas's cryptic words echoing in her thoughts. Lost in contemplation, she nearly collided with a figure standing in the shadows of her building's entrance. Her heart leapt into her throat as she recognized the stooped form of Thomas. "Miss Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I apologize for the intrusion, but we must speak. In private." Sarah hesitated, torn between curiosity and caution. But something in the old man's eyes, a mixture of urgency and kindness, made her decision for her. Of course, she nodded, leading him up to her tiny apartment. Once inside, Thomas seemed to age before her eyes, the weight of untold secrets bowing his shoulders. He lowered himself onto Sarah's worn couch with a heavy sigh. "My dear," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah's heart raced, a mixture of fear and anticipation coursing through her veins. I think so," she replied, her voice barely audible. Thomas reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing a yellowed envelope. With shaking hands, he held it out to Sarah. This belongs to you. It's a letter from your mother." Sarah gasped, her eyes widening in shock. "But my mother died when I was a baby. How is this possible? The woman who raised you, God rest her soul, was not your birth mother," Thomas said gently. "Your true mother, she was forced to give you up, to protect you from a world of wealth and cruelty that would have destroyed your spirit." As Sarah's world tilted on its axis, Thomas continued, his words painting a picture of a past shrouded in secrecy and heartache. A tale of forbidden love, of sacrifice, and of a baby girl hidden away to protect her from those who would use her as a pawn in their games of power and greed. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the letter, her eyes scanning the flowing script. As she read, tears began to stream down her face, each word a revelation that shook her to her very core. It can't be," she whispered, looking up at Thomas with eyes full of disbelief and dawning realization. "Are you saying that I'm?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "Yes, my dear. You are the true heir to the Blackwell fortune. Elizabeth Blackwell is your birth mother." The room seemed to spin around Sarah as the magnitude of this revelation crashed over her. She was no longer Sarah Thompson, the poor nurse's aide from the wrong side of the tracks. She was Sarah Blackwell, secret daughter of one of the wealthiest families in town. As the shock began to ebb, replaced by a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, Sarah's mind raced with questions. Why had she been given up? Why was Thomas revealing this now? And most importantly, what would she do with this earth-shattering information? Little did Sarah know, her journey of discovery was only just beginning. The coming days would test her in ways she could never have imagined, forcing her to confront not only the cruel family that had unknowingly tormented her for years, but also the very nature of her own identity. As the first part of her incredible story draws to a close, Sarah stands on the precipice of a new life, armed with a truth that has the power to heal or destroy. The humble woman, once mocked and belittled, now holds in her hands the key to unraveling the Blackwell family's carefully constructed facade. But in a world where money and power reign supreme, will Sarah's inherent kindness and compassion be enough to navigate the treacherous waters ahead? Or will she be swept away by the very forces that sought to keep her hidden all these years? The stage is set for a tale of revelation, redemption, and the triumph of the human spirit. As Sarah takes her first tentative steps into a world she never knew was hers, the lives of everyone around her are about to change forever. The humble woman's secret has been revealed, but the true test of her character is yet to come. In the crucible of wealth and privilege, will Sarah Thompson Blackwell emerge as a beacon of hope and change, or will she be consumed by the very world that once rejected her? Only time will tell, as the next chapter of this extraordinary journey unfolds. The gentle glow of dawn crept through Sarah's threadbare curtains, casting a soft light on her tear-stained face. She had spent the night in a whirlwind of emotions, alternating between reading and rereading her birth mother's letter and staring blankly at the wall, her mind struggling to process the earth-shattering revelation. As the first rays of sunlight touched her face, Sarah stirred from her restless slumber. The events of the previous evening came rushing back, hitting her with the force of a tidal wave. She was Sarah Blackwell, the secret daughter of Elizabeth Blackwell and the true heir to the family fortune. With trembling hands, she reached for the letter once more, her eyes tracing the elegant script that had turned her world upside down. My dearest Sarah. If you are reading this, then the time has come for you to know the truth. I am your birth mother, Elizabeth Blackwell, and the weight of the secret I have carried all these years threatens to crush my very soul. You were born of a love so pure and true that it defied the constraints of our rigid society. Your father, James Morrison, was not of our social standing, but his heart was noble and his spirit kind. We fell deeply in love, but the world conspired to tear us apart. When I discovered I was pregnant with you, I knew I had to protect you from the cruelty and manipulation that defined my world. With a heavy heart, I made the agonizing decision to give you up, to shield you from the toxic environment that would have surely crushed your beautiful spirit. Know that not a day has passed where I haven't thought of you, longed to hold you in my arms, and dreamed of the remarkable woman you would become. I hope that one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me for the choices I made. You are the rightful heir to the Blackwell fortune, but more importantly, you are the keeper of a legacy of love and compassion that has been sorely lacking in our family for generations. My darling daughter, I leave the choice in your hands. Should you wish to claim your birthright, know that it comes with both privilege and peril. But whatever path you choose, never forget that you were born of love, and that love will always be your true inheritance. With all my heart. Your mother, Elizabeth. Sarah's fingers traced the signature at the bottom of the page, her mind reeling. The woman who had looked down on her with such disdain was her mother. The family that had tormented her for years was her own flesh and blood. A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Sarah hastily wiped her eyes and smoothed her rumpled clothes before answering. Jake Morrison stood in the hallway, his warm brown eyes filled with concern. Sarah? Are you okay? I heard some commotion last night and, wait, have you been crying? As Sarah looked into Jake's kind face, a sudden realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. Morrison. Her father's name was James Morrison. Could it be possible that Jake was? Jake, she began hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. This might sound crazy, but did you ever know a man named James Morrison? Jake's brow furrowed in confusion. James Morrison? That was my uncle's name. He passed away years ago, but my dad always said he was the black sheep of the family. Fell in love with some rich socialite and disappeared. Why do you ask? Sarah's knees buckled, and she gripped the doorframe for support. I think we need to talk, Jake. There's something you need to know. As Sarah invited Jake into her apartment and began to unravel the incredible tale, neither of them noticed the sleek black car parked across the street. Behind its tinted windows, Veronica Blackwell sat seething, her manicured nails digging into the leather steering wheel. "So," she hissed, her eyes narrowing as she watched Jake enter Sarah's apartment. "The little mouse thinks she can play with the big cats. We'll see about that." With a screech of tires, Veronica sped away, her mind already formulating a plan to crush Sarah once and for all. Back at the Blackwell mansion, Elizabeth paced nervously in her opulent bedroom, her silk robe swishing with each agitated step. The weight of her secret had become unbearable, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, struggling to keep her voice steady. Richard Blackwell strode into the room, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Would you care to explain this?" he snarled, throwing a crumpled piece of paper at her feet. Elizabeth's blood ran cold as she recognized the handwriting on the page. It was a draft of the letter she had written to Sarah, one she thought she had destroyed years ago. "Richard, I can explain," she began, but her husband cut her off with a savage gesture. "Explain? Explain?" he roared, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. "You've made a mockery of our marriage, our family name. Do you have any idea what this will do to us if it gets out?" As Richard continued his tirade, neither of them noticed the shadow that fell across the partially open door. Veronica stood frozen in the hallway, her ear pressed against the crack, drinking in every word of the explosive confrontation. Her mind raced as the pieces fell into place. Sarah Thompson, the pathetic nurse's aide she had tormented for years, was her half-sister. The true heir to the Blackwell fortune. A cruel smile twisted Veronica's lips as a plan began to form in her mind. If she played her cards right, she could use this information to secure her own position and crush Sarah once and for all. Across town, in Sarah's tiny apartment, Jake sat in stunned silence as she finished recounting the events of the previous night. The letter from Elizabeth lay on the coffee table between them, a tangible link to a past neither of them had known existed. "So," Jake said slowly, his voice thick with emotion. "We're cousins?" Sarah nodded, her eyes searching his face for any sign of rejection or disgust. To her relief, she saw only warmth and a hint of wonder. "I always felt a connection to you, Sarah," Jake said softly, reaching out to take her hand. "Now I know why. We're family." As the weight of everything threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah found herself clinging to Jake's steady presence like a lifeline. For the first time since learning the truth about her identity, she felt a glimmer of hope. "What are you going to do?" Jake asked gently. "About the Blackwells, I mean. Are you going to confront them?" Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to march right up to that mansion and demand answers. But another part is terrified," Jake finished for her, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "It's okay to be scared, Sarah. This is huge. But whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'm here for you. We're family now, remember?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes at Jake's unwavering support. As she looked into his kind face, so similar to the father she had never known, she felt a surge of courage. "You're right," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I need answers. And not just for me, but for your Uncle James, my father. He deserves to have his story told." As Sarah and Jake began to formulate a plan, neither of them could have imagined the storm that was brewing at Rosewood General Hospital. Dr. Richard Blackwell stormed through the hospital corridors, his face a thundercloud of barely contained rage. Nurses and orderlies scattered in his wake, sensing the palpable aura of fury surrounding him. He burst into his office, slamming the door behind him with such force that the framed medical degrees on the wall rattled precariously. Collapsing into his leather chair, he pulled out a bottle of expensive scotch from his desk drawer and poured himself a generous measure. As the amber liquid burned its way down his throat, Richard's mind raced. How could Elizabeth have betrayed him like this? And with some nobody, no less. The thought of a child, his wife's child, running around out there with a claim to the Blackwell fortune made his blood boil. A soft knock at the door interrupted his dark musings. "What?" he barked, not bothering to look up. The door creaked open, and Thomas, the elderly butler, stepped inside. "I apologize for the intrusion, Dr. Blackwell," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "But there's something you need to know." Richard's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he took in the old man's solemn expression. "What is it, Thomas? Spit it out." Thomas took a deep breath, steeling himself for the storm he knew was coming. "It's about Sarah Thompson, sir. The nurse's aide." "What about her?" Richard growled, his patience wearing thin. She's your wife's daughter, sir. The child from the letter." The glass of scotch shattered against the wall, mere inches from Thomas's head. Richard leapt to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "How long have you known?" he snarled, advancing on the old butler. Thomas stood his ground, his rheumy eyes meeting Richard's furious gaze without flinching. "Since the beginning, sir. I was there the night Miss Elizabeth gave the child away." "You treacherous old fool!" Richard roared, his hand raised as if to strike the elderly man. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Before Thomas could respond, the office door burst open once more. Veronica swept in, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of triumph and malice. Now, Daddy," she purred, placing a restraining hand on her father's arm. "Let's not be hasty. I think we can turn this little situation to our advantage." Richard's eyes narrowed as he regarded his daughter. "What are you talking about, Veronica?" A cruel smile played across Veronica's lips as she began to outline her plan. As Thomas listened in horror, he realized that the web of secrets and lies he had helped weave was about to ensnare them all. Sarah's heart pounded as she approached the imposing gates of Rosewood General Hospital. Jake walked beside her, his steady presence a much-needed source of strength. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "No," she admitted with a wry smile. "But I need answers, Jake." And this is where it all began. As they pushed through the main entrance, the familiar antiseptic smell hit Sarah like a wave. How many times had she walked these halls, head bowed, trying to make herself invisible? Now, she stood tall, her chin lifted in defiance. They made their way to the administrative wing, where Dr. Blackwell's office was located. Sarah's steps faltered as they rounded the corner, coming face to face with Melissa, the gossipy nurse's aide. Melissa's eyes widened in surprise. "Sarah? What are you doing here?" "And who's this?" she asked, her gaze sliding appreciatively over Jake. Before Sarah could respond, the door to Dr. Blackwell's office flew open. Richard himself stormed out, his face a mask of barely contained fury. He stopped short at the sight of Sarah, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "You," he snarled, jabbing a finger in her direction. "In my office. Now." Sarah felt Jake tense beside her, ready to intervene. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze before stepping forward. "It's okay," she murmured. "I need to do this." As Sarah followed Richard into his office, she caught a glimpse of Thomas's worried face. The old butler gave her an almost imperceptible nod, a silent message of support. The door closed behind them with an ominous click. Richard whirled to face Sarah, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and, was that fear? "So," he began, his voice dangerously low. "You think you can just waltz in here and turn my world upside down? Who do you think you are?" Sarah stood her ground, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. "I think you know exactly who I am. Father." The word hung in the air between them, charged with years of unspoken truths and buried secrets. For a moment, Richard seemed to deflate, the weight of his lies finally catching up to him. But then, like a cornered animal, he lashed out. "You are nothing," he hissed, advancing on Sarah. "Do you hear me? Nothing. I don't care what that letter says. You will never be a Blackwell." Sarah felt a surge of pity for this man, so consumed by his own bitterness and fear. "I'm not here to take anything from you," she said softly. "I just want the truth. About my mother, about my father. I have a right to know." Richard's laugh was hollow, devoid of any real mirth. "The truth? You want the truth? Fine. Your mother was weak. She fell for some penniless dreamer and nearly destroyed everything we had built. I saved her, saved this family, by getting rid of you." Each word was like a dagger to Sarah's heart, but she refused to let him see her pain. "And my father?" she pressed. "What happened to him? A flicker of something, regret? Guilt?" Passed across Richard's face before his mask of contempt slammed back into place. James Morrison was a fool. He should have known better than to reach above his station. When Elizabeth told him she was pregnant, he wanted to run away with her, start a new life. I convinced him otherwise. Sarah's blood ran cold at the implication in Richard's words. "What did you do to him?" she whispered, dreading the answer. Before Richard could respond, the office door burst open. Veronica swept in, her eyes glittering with malicious triumph. "Oh, don't stop on my account," she purred. "This is all so deliciously sordid." Sarah's head spun as she looked between Richard and Veronica. The father who had rejected her, the sister who had tormented her. How had her life become this tangled web of secrets and lies? "Veronica," Richard growled, a warning in his tone. "This doesn't concern you." "Oh, but it does, Daddy dearest," Veronica replied, her smile razor sharp. "You see, I've done a little digging of my own. And I think it's time we all laid our cards on the table." As Veronica began to speak, unraveling years of carefully guarded secrets, Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex and far more devastating than she could have ever imagined. Outside in the hallway, Jake paced anxiously, his mind racing with worry for Sarah. He had half a mind to burst into that office and drag her out, away from the toxic Blackwell family and all their poisonous secrets. A gentle hand on his arm startled him from his thoughts. He turned to find Thomas, the elderly butler, regarding him with kind, knowing eyes. "You must be Jake Morrison," Thomas said softly. "You look so much like your Uncle James." Jake's eyes widened in surprise. You knew my uncle?" Thomas nodded, a sad smile playing across his weathered features. "I knew him well. He was a good man, Mr. Morrison. A man of principle and kindness, qualities sorely lacking in the Blackwell household." As Jake listened, transfixed, Thomas began to weave a tale of love, betrayal, and sacrifice. A story of two young people from different worlds, brought together by a love that defied social boundaries. Of a child born of that love, hidden away to protect her from the cruelty of a world that valued wealth and status above all else. "Your uncle loved Sarah's mother with every fiber of his being," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "And when Dr. Blackwell threatened to destroy everything, their reputations, their futures, James made the ultimate sacrifice. Jake's heart clenched as he began to understand the true depth of the tragedy that had shaped his family's history. "What happened to him?" he asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. The grand ballroom of the Rosewood Community Center, once the exclusive domain of the town's elite, buzzed with excitement. Children in colorful costumes darted between elegant tables, their laughter a joyous counterpoint to the soft strains of music filling the air. At the center of it all stood Sarah Thompson Morrison, her eyes sparkling as she surveyed the scene. The annual fundraiser for the Rosewood Children's Hospital had become the highlight of the town's social calendar, but not for the reasons it might have been in years past. Gone were the days of ostentatious displays of wealth and whispered gossip. In their place was a genuine sense of community and purpose. Sarah's hand rested gently on her swollen belly, a smile playing on her lips as she felt the baby kick. Jake appeared at her side, slipping an arm around her waist and pressing a kiss to her temple. "How are my two favorite people doing?" he murmured, his voice warm with affection. "We're perfect," Sarah replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though your daughter seems determined to join the party early." Jake chuckled, his hand joining hers on her belly. "Like mother, like daughter. Always ready to make an entrance." As they shared a moment of quiet intimacy amidst the bustling crowd, Sarah caught sight of familiar faces in the throng. Elizabeth, elegant as ever but with a newfound warmth in her bearing, was deep in conversation with Thomas. The elderly butler, now retired but still an integral part of their unconventional family, was regaling a group of wide-eyed children with tales of Rosewood's colorful history. Dr. Blackwell, his hair now more gray than black, stood somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the crowd. The years had softened his harsh edges, and while he and Sarah would never have the father-daughter relationship she had once longed for, they had found a tentative peace. And there, helping a young girl in a wheelchair navigate the buffet table, was Veronica. The transformation in Sarah's half-sister had been perhaps the most surprising of all. The bitter, status-obsessed socialite had given way to a woman who had found purpose in helping others. Her sharp wit, once used to cut others down, now brought laughter and light to the children she worked with at the hospital. As Sarah took in the scene, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This room, once a symbol of all that had excluded and belittled her, was now a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake's voice rang out, drawing everyone's attention. "If I could have your attention for a moment." Sarah looked at him in surprise. This wasn't part of the program they had planned. Jake smiled at her reassuringly before addressing the crowd. 5 years ago, our community was forever changed by a remarkable woman. A woman who, in the face of cruelty and rejection, chose kindness. Who, when confronted with a legacy of wealth and privilege, chose to use it to lift others up. Sarah felt her cheeks flush as all eyes turned to her. Jake continued, his voice filled with pride and love. "Sarah Thompson Morrison didn't just change her own life, she changed all of ours. She showed us that true strength lies not in how much you have, but in how much you give. That family isn't just about blood, but about the bonds we choose to forge and nurture." He turned to Sarah, taking her hands in his. "My love, you came into this world surrounded by secrets and lies. But you've filled it with truth and light. The legacy you're creating, for our daughter, for this community, is one of love, compassion, and hope." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as the room erupted in applause. She looked around at the faces of those gathered, friends and former foes, the wealthy and the struggling, all brought together by a shared purpose. As the music swelled and Jake pulled her into a gentle dance, Sarah closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a lonely, belittled nurse's aide to the heart of a community reborn. From a secret shame to a beacon of hope. The humble woman had indeed left them speechless. Not with the revelation of her true identity, but with the strength of her spirit, the depth of her compassion, and the transformative power of her love. As Sarah and Jake swayed to the music, their unborn daughter nestled safely between them. The story of the Blackwell heir came full circle. The secrets of the past had given way to a future bright with promise, a legacy rewritten by the power of one woman's unwavering kindness. And in that moment, surrounded by the family she had found and the community she had helped rebuild, Sarah Thompson Morrison knew that this was more than a happy ending. It was a beautiful beginning. The end.